We had love.
We had a spare room.
We had a garden big enough for a few plant pots.
And we had no idea about the adoption process.
We opened an online form and hit submit. Should be easy, right? I'm Sam.
And I'm Paul, and welcome to the My Two Dads podcast, where we bring everything about adoption to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the My Two Dads podcast. If you're a returning listener, thanks for hanging on in there. And if you're new here, don't forget to check out our first episode.
We are extremely honoured to introduce this episode's guest, quarter finalist from the world famous Great British Bake Off. We have Christine Wallace, or as I like to call her, Nan Mum. Thanks so much for joining us. Would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, hello to you both. And I'm extremely honoured to be asked to do this, especially as it's world famous. I like that title. You can do that anytime you like.
Our podcast is not world famous yet, but the show you were on, well.
A little bit about me. Well, back in 2013, which it was 10 years ago, but it doesn't seem that long, I applied to go on the Great British Bake Off, not thinking for one moment that I would get anywhere near it. And after quite a few auditions and quite a lot of, shall we say, stress, I did manage to get down to the last few and was chosen to be on the Bake Off, which was a huge honour, but extremely nerve-wracking. I have to say, though, I enjoyed every single minute of that. But it's given me an afterlife, because in the 10 years since the programme, I'm still doing so much. I'm very busy. I lead a hugely busy life, cooking still in my kitchen, giving lessons, doing demonstrations, planning food festivals. It's huge.
Making us roast dinners.
Making you roast dinners and various other bits and pieces. I have to say, and giving you advice, although you don't need it much anymore because you're a very good baker yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. But this is not the baking podcast. But thank you very much.
But without the baking, can I just say that I do have other things I do besides cooking, and I love reading. I read loads of books. It's my big passion. Other ladies buy shoes, I buy books. A bit of sewing, a bit of gardening. That's me, basically.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. Honestly, there is a reason that you are here, and I'm sure listeners will find that out as we go through the episode. So in this episode, we are going to cover stage 1 of the process. We did go over the steps that are included last time, but what I just want to do is just give a very quick recap. So it's a bit of a list. Strap yourself in. We've got a learning log, which is everything that you do to prepare yourself for adoption. So whether that be books, TV shows, highly recommend trying on Apple TV. Ignore the panel episode. It's nothing like that. But aside from that, really, really great dramatization of the adoption process and what it feels like to go through it. You've got mandatory 2-day adoption training with an additional half-day of EP training. Self-evaluation forms, which is basically your written version of everything you've been through in your life. And it really helps your social worker to get a better picture of you. So well worth doing. Finance checks, as we know, with Paul's pants subscription. Health checks. This is done through your GP surgery. Sometimes there is a charge and sometimes there is not. Local authority checks, that's for everywhere that you've lived, just to double check that there's nothing on your history in those locations. Police checks, this is just a DBS check. You fill out a form online, that's then checked against the police database and they send it to you in the post. Home assessment visit. So that is where they come and they just check the safety of your house and any dangers or things that you may need to change just to make it safer for a little one. And then you have references from family and friends. So, Nan, Christine, hello.
Yes.
When we first told you that we were entering the adoption process, what were your thoughts of adoption itself? Did you have sort of any knowledge of adoption prior to us starting the process?
Well, no, I knew roughly what was involved in adoption in the way that they would have to do checks on all sorts of things, but I had no idea on how in depth it was. Listening to you telling us the various stages about it all within stage 1, do you not think some people could be put off at that stage and think, wow, this is so long and involved and this is just stage 1? From my point of view, I was really surprised on how in depth it went. I was just pleased, actually, that my battered old address book, which was full up with nearly all of you,
Yes.
had all the addresses you needed in a single go.
Yes, and luckily you're not too vigorous at crossing them out. You just put a line through them.
Just put a line through it, yes.
Going to your question then of,
Yes.
Do you think it would put people off? I don't think so. I think that all the steps in the stage 1 are there to be able to give the social workers and the adoption agency the very best picture of you as either yourself or a couple. And it's to give them all the information they need to be able to then go on in stage 2 and write a report about you, which we will discuss on the next episode. But it's mainly just to give them as much information as possible. Would you agree, Bib?
Yeah, I was just sat here thinking and reflecting on that. I do think it can be quite intimidating. And I think at the time when we were given the great list of things that we would need to be getting ready, putting together, filling out. I mean, we've talked about paperwork a lot. For some people, I think that can be greatly intimidating. And for that reason, I know I've mentioned before, but just reaching out to others who have either been through the process, are currently in the process in that moment themselves can be really, really helpful. Something from last week that I've been thinking a lot about actually is when Andy said, if you're not at a point in your life where you can give this absolutely 100%, then it could be time to reflect on that and perhaps think, is this the right time right now? Because it is intense from that very first step, I think.
But can I just say that I think, although it is very involved, and you find out more and more about that as you go through the process, and it can seem obviously a bit tedious at times, I think it's vital that it's done.
Oh, absolutely. Could not agree more.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. Each of those things that we've talked about, although, like you say, they could be seen as tedious, they actually help to put that jigsaw of you and your life together so that eventually when you start looking at matching and family finding, they've just got such a clear picture of what perhaps could work for you, would work for you. And so I think you're right. In my opinion, I don't think there's anything there that ought not to be. It's all there for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, our social worker, she was outstanding. And I know that's not everybody's experience, and we're aware of that. But in our case, our first social worker was standout. She was brilliant. And by the end of stage 1, she knew us better than most people, because she knew everything that had happened from birth till now.
I think what Paul said is very applicable when he said, if you know somebody else that's gone through the process, because it always helps, doesn't it, to get some experience from someone else. They make it a little bit more real and you understand more how long it's going to take and what they went through. So I think then you're more prepared to do it yourself, aren't you?
That's why we started the podcast, was because we were getting so many messages on Instagram from people sort of asking for advice throughout sort of stage 1, stage 2 and beyond, that we thought it'd be nice just to have an open discussion with everybody about what our experience was.
Yeah.
Right. So I suppose when we were putting the idea or the context for the show together, we were thinking early in stage 1, when we were considering what the future could be for us, inviting a little one into our homes. Christine, can I ask, did you worry at all about how you would potentially bond with a child that had come to our lives through adoption? Was that ever anything that you'd sort of thought about? Tricky question, I know.
Yes.
Diving in there with that one.
Yes. And to be honest, yes, I was very worried about it. No getting away from it. When you have a, let's say, blood grandchild, that's part of your family history. It's part of the bloodline, and you form a bond almost instantly, I think. But when it's a child perhaps coming in from, completely different environment, I did worry, would I take to him, her? How would I react? So yes, it was quite big then. I did think that a lot.
Wow, I never knew that. That's really interesting.
Yes, it is, because I think sometimes you have a natural affinity with a child and sometimes you don't,
Yeah.
with any child. So I was a bit concerned about that, but those worries didn't last very long after your little boy appeared.
But I do think that's something that, if we're being completely honest, and we've said from the beginning that this is what this would all be about, it's us sharing with you our experience and anything and everything that may have run through our minds. And that is something that I think, talking to our support network, early doors, I have to say early doors, they were worried about. And I think we're going to touch more upon in this episode that friends and family training, because I do think that was a key moment for a lot of our family members in terms of going, right, I get this more now. I understand more about this. I know what it could potentially feel like and look like for us in the future. So I won't go down spoiler road at the moment, but
Yeah,
we will get there.
it's weird though, because when you said about your initial worry, I was instantly defensive. I'm like, no,
yes.
don't worry.
Yes, I mean, I can understand that, and that's why I never would have said at the time, look, I'm really worried about this. Will I love your child or not? But it was in my head, and to be honest, I think it would be in most people's. They'd be not worried, but just wondering whether it would happen or not.
Thank you for being honest, because it's really useful to know. So what I wanted to do was to give our listeners an idea of who you are to me, and how that impacted our adoption journey.
Okay.
So when I don't know why I'm telling you this now, and
I'm not a complete pain then.
No, absolutely not. So unfortunately, we lost my mum when I was 13, and we lost her quite suddenly. So it was completely unexpected, and it made things very difficult for me. So I carried on life pretty much as normal, and it didn't change me in a way. But what did happen was, around between 7 and 10 years after the fact, I started to struggle with my identity and who I was, and my emotions, really. And it turned out, after a lot of investigations, that it was a delayed onset of grief, which makes perfect sense. And
Indeed.
I remember when when that was concluded after a lot of messing around, you completely agreed. And in fact, were like, I thought that from the start. So the reason that I wanted to tell that story was because having an experience of losing a parent very early on, I thought was going to be a negative in stage 1. I thought me struggling to come to terms with that loss, and the steps that I had to go through to recover from that, I thought it was going to be a negative. And at some points I worried, and I remember having conversations with Paul, and I remember phoning you, Nan, and going over it, saying, I'm going to be the reason that we don't have a child. And I really, really worried about it. And I was completely wrong. So the great news is that our social worker did quiz me a lot on how I feel about it now, how openly I can talk about our loss, and the impact that it had. How have I processed that? And then what she did was turn that around, which we will discuss more in next week's episode when we cover the writing of the PAR. But she turned that round to be an absolute positive. And I understand it now even more that we've got our little boy home. What she wrote in that report was absolutely spot on. And that was that by us experiencing that loss of mum so early on, I
Yes.
am then able to understand the loss to some extent that a child placed for adoption has been through.
Exactly.
It just struck a chord so strongly.
Funnily enough, at that time, I knew you were struggling with that. But I said to your Gramps, I can only see that as a positive in some ways. But it was very difficult to talk about it with you as you were struggling, and to turn something that you're so worried about into a positive is not easy. But I could see that maybe it would make a difference to your background, but in a good way.
And one of the reasons for mentioning this, I think, is because we talked about opening up those difficult conversations with a stranger in the beginning. The social worker comes into your life. You don't really know them at that stage. And I know I said my advice last time was to be as open and as honest as you can with them. But those sessions can feel a lot like therapy.
I think she even said to us once, like, this is free therapy, like,
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't say enough times how much it felt like that. And be prepared, I would say, that if you have had trauma in your life at whatever stage, we're talking about from birth to the present day, because that's what you will cover in great detail with your social worker through that initial portion of stage 1. Also be prepared that that's going to instigate conversations with your support network, your immediate family, your chosen family, that can be quite, I don't want to say difficult. It's not difficult. It's just very emotionally charged.
It's raw.
Yeah.
They're conversations that you wouldn't usually have sitting around a dinner table. You wouldn't talk about an emotion that you had 15, 16 years ago. Just randomly out of the blue. So I think that, in fact, it encourages you just to accept this.
Did you feel that really helped you though, Sam, when you were talking about things that you wouldn't normally talk about? Did you feel that helped you?
Yeah, like beyond words. And I didn't understand it at the time. And I really didn't understand it. And we will go into it more in the next episode, just on the particulars of it, because most of it happened in stage 2. But there was a lot of digging around that subject, because they needed to be certain, of course they did, that I had processed those emotions effectively.
Yes.
And what came out of the other end was just this incredible understanding of how that one trauma, which affected us all, has then gone on to create me and
Absolutely.
to make me who I am. And another big part of that, of course, is you. And that's why you're here today, because you then took the role of mum in a way. So that was just, yeah, it was like a full round circle. And I think covering that was really, really important, because I remember it was such a worry for me, and I don't want other people to worry.
Well, I was just so pleased that I was there for you and I could take on that role of mum. And although officially you are my grandson, I think of you actually more of a son because of all of that. And I think I was able to advise you in ways that have made you what you are. You're a strong personality, a strong man, and you cope with things very well. That might have been difficult earlier on.
Stop.
Truth is, that's how it is.
Yeah. And like I said, the reason for mentioning this is purely that your social circle, your support network, as it's referred to as part of the process, is going to be crucial at all stages of this process. We're talking in the lead up to it, in thinking about, is this the right time for us? Is this the right direction? We're thinking about stage 1 interviews, which is a really nice segue into our next question, which is aimed at you, Christine.
Yes.
So we mentioned earlier that there are reference checks in stage 1, and this is near the end of stage 1. And what they do is that they invite family members and people identified by the potential adopters to answer questions about us.
Yeah, to be interviewed, basically.
To be interviewed. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Because you did it, didn't you? You did it for us.
Yes, I did. Your social worker came over to my home and interviewed us in quite depth about you both, which actually is quite difficult. Because when you're so close and you love somebody so much, you don't want to say anything about them that isn't absolutely shiningly wonderful. And that is not realistic. You've got to look at it more objectively and think, yes, well, maybe he could react in that way, but I would advise that he speaks to Paul about it or speaks to me about it. So you were able to not say everything would be wonderful, because everything isn't always wonderful. And there are always going to be situations, especially with a young child, that you find difficult to cope with. And you've got to be able to get advice. And if you're not able to do that, if you don't want to do that, then I think you're going to find the whole process very difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why there's such a heavy impact and importance to your social circle and your support network.
Yes, but she was good with her questions and very, she listened carefully to everything we said. And it was easy to talk to her and easy to be honest.
I hope everyone finds that as well, because I was about to say, I suppose one of the key things that they're trying to get out of that conversation with your social and support network is just how you would cope with stress and how you're going to cope with an unknown situation.
Oh, yes, that's it.
And obviously that's really important, because come the day when those little footsteps come walking through your threshold of your house, how you cope with that, they're going to try and find as much out as they can, aren't they? Your social worker will.
Yeah, they need to be confident that you're going to have somebody to ask for help if you need it.
Yes, and that's the most important thing, isn't it? In not just in this process, in all processes of life. If you need help, ask for it.
Oh, absolutely. I could not agree more. So thinking back to when we were going through stage one, I know we actually had a discussion off air, away from the microphone, where you struggled actually to recognize the difference between stage one and stage two. You didn't even kind of know that it was broken up for us. But as much as you can you remember back and the impact that it had on myself and Paul? Can you remember around that time?
I can, although it does seem quite a while ago now that this all happened, but I can remember being a little concerned, because obviously you were both holding down very intense full-time jobs and trying to get all the information that was needed together was stressful. And therefore I was a bit concerned about how this process was impacting on you both. And would you cope with it? And I remember one time, Sam, when I rang, you were a little bit short, which you're not usually. And I think it was because I was able to say to myself, it was because he's a little bit stressed. He's trying to get all this information together. And although I knew it was a necessary thing, it had to happen.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Thinking about it, how did it feel for us? I feel like after every session that we had filling out that long document about birth to the present day, I just couldn't switch off from it, because it made me think about an awful lot of things that you don't really dedicate a lot of your waking thoughts to. So just to give an example, I remember thinking back to my school days, and I said to our social worker, I don't know if I have just a particularly poor memory, but I don't really have a great memory of primary school. I have flashes here and there. I said, but obviously secondary school I can bring to mind a whole lot easier. And one of the things I'm happy to talk about is that I did have a tough time at secondary school. It wasn't an easy time for me. I endured quite heavy bullying, and obviously now that is something that I've processed, but having to go back to relive those moments, to think about it, and not only do that, but then also think about how that impacts on my ability now to handle situations of stress, of difficulty, of prejudice. That was,
Do you think
very
it does
intense.
help, Paul? Do you think it does help you now? going through that horrible bullying stage, and how you coped with it then. Has it helped you now?
I can say with some conviction that I absolutely hope that would never happen to anyone at all in their lives. But with anything, when you face adversity or challenge, what it does is, I suppose, I hate to use that phrase, that it's character building. I hate that. But what it does do is it gives you a little bit of armor. That's how I sort of see it, is that those challenges molded and shaped me to the person I am today, who is able to cope in situations where things get tricky, where, things feel uncomfortable. So again, reflecting back and thinking, what was the purpose of that? Why did I need to go through my whole school journey with my social worker? Well, now I understand why. I think, but it's not easy. I will say that it's not easy, but completely worthwhile.
And of course, it helps for the future, doesn't it? Because if your child goes down some of those routes in the future, then you will know exactly how to cope with it because of your own experiences.
Absolutely.
We're on the same wavelength.
And again, totally agree with that. And that was one of the things that our social worker mentioned. She said, having been through that, you're going to be an awful lot more sympathetic. You're going to have empathy to a child that may experience that. And we did talk quite frankly about the fact that having same-sex parents, although times are incredibly different to what they were, it is something that's different. And difference, as we know, can sometimes lead to unkindness. And although we would hope in the world that all that is gone, it's not completely gone. So that's important, I think, to think about.
Yes, very.
So Paul mentioned earlier on about the friends and family training. So this can sometimes be found in stage 2, and I think it's mainly directed towards stage 2. But why we've got you here, you actually attended friends and family training for us, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We did it on a Zoom meeting. And I thought it would probably be about half an hour, but it was a lot longer than that. It was 2.5 hours-ish. And when we realised it was going to be that long, we thought, oh, gosh, this is going to be long. But it was so informative. It really was. Because we had no idea how much of an impact the friends and family would have on your process, especially close family like us. And they went through their own experiences, and they went through how we should deal with your child when you got that little person. So if we were visiting, for example, and the child fell over, I don't rush and pick him up or her up. That's for you to do. So she knows exactly who to go to for help and guidance. So the child is not confused. I had no idea about anything of that ilk. They also spoke about the adoption process in terms of why children go into care and why they need to be adopted, which in some ways is quite horrific when you hear some of the stories. But then you realise how very valuable it is to have a child go into a loving, caring home like yours for a lovely life to come, which I'm sure it will be, and how valuable that is to know that. So we came away from that meeting feeling we knew a whole lot more about how to deal with the whole process. It was brilliant, really brilliant.
Well, a little bit of context around that as well. So I remember, I think our family members booked up almost an entire meeting.
Yeah, they asked us to stop. They said, could you just put some on another one? And the trainers themselves, I remember them really well, and they were lovely. And they had both adopted, hadn't they? So their experiences were coming from their own experiences.
Oh, yes, very definitely. The person who was speaking to us had adopted 3 children. And was talking about her own experiences and difficulties, which there obviously are from time to time, which was very informative for us. Yes, it was excellent.
Yeah, with those 2 in particular, obviously we can't mention their names, but they were amazing, and we had them as part of our training days as well, didn't we? And I know we talked a bit before about the value of having people or actual adopters there that you can talk to, because it's like they've lived it, they've breathed it.
We're now those people.
I'm just thinking that as I sat here.
Yeah.
Well, we're pretty green, but you're right. Yeah, we
Well, that
have.
goes back to what we were saying before, doesn't it? About meeting people and talking to people who have been through the experience and how much it helps.
Yeah, and again, I concur. It was interesting because I remember everyone going onto that Zoom and us knowing that was going on, and we were saying, oh, they're going to have a little bit of an insight into what we've been through over the last how many weeks. And talking to everyone after it was just fascinating and warm and lovely, because suddenly you had a peek through our lens. And I remember people saying from our close social network, just, oh, so we hadn't thought about this, or gosh, that's a tricky thing.
Well, the most refreshing part was when we would say stages to you, or we would say, oh yeah, we've got, panel coming up, and you were just suddenly, because you'd been on the training, you knew what that was, and that was so refreshing, because for months we had lived sort of having to say to somebody, oh, we're really nervous about this part. And then before you can get any advice about that, you then had to explain what that part actually was.
And then we, the family members, are really much more involved in the process with you, rather than being a bit detached from it. Suddenly it's more real, if you like.
I absolutely, totally get that. And I think that's where that warm feeling came from for me, because we did feel banded together even more at that point. I know you'd all been interviewed and asked lots of questions, and we'd had questions asked of us, but suddenly it was like a little bit of glue. And I think that is crucial. If you're going into this process and that's something that's offered to your support network, please get them to grasp it with both hands. I think it was just so important, wasn't it?
Yeah, could not agree anymore.
Oh, I'm next to do the question. I've seen how big it is. Are you ready for this one, Christine?
Well, I don't know now. Possibly.
Here we go. So the question is, how has adoption changed your life?
My life? Well, that actually is quite an easy question to answer, because you having your lovely little boy has given us huge joy. It really has. And
us too.
I love him dearly, and it's changed my life in a way. I mean, I thought that little children in my life were probably long gone, unless, you got married. And I hesitate to use the word great-gran. I don't like the word great. So it's not in my vocabulary at all. So we just go for Nana. And to be a dear little boy's Nana is absolutely wonderful for me. The pleasure I get out of going into baby shops, and recently we went on holiday to Italy, where they have the most beautiful shops. And I had to really stop and take my hand out of my wallet, because I could have bought so much.
For future reference, you never need to stop. You can just keep going.
So it's changed my life immeasurably, because I get so much joy out of seeing him and being with him, but also seeing the joy and happiness that he's brought you to. And that is lovely in itself. So yes, that's how it's changed my life.
I don't think we can top that answer.
We absolutely can't. So we put out a post on our Instagram quite recently, and we asked for questions from our listeners and people that follow us on Instagram. Okay. Link is in the show notes, and we've had a really interesting question, and that's from Abby on Instagram, and she asked, what did they, i.e. social workers, ask/look into that you didn't expect? So we have a couple of examples. The first one is something that we just didn't see coming, and that's that I lived in Spain, Tenerife, for about 4 years. And then when I noted that down on the previous addresses, they came to me and said that they would need a DBS check from Spain. First of all, had no idea. I can speak very small Spanish. I can ask for a pizza, but I can't ask the government for a report on me. So actually, that was really quite tricky because we were in the middle of the pandemic. The world was on lockdown, and the only way that I could get a DBS was by flying to Madrid. It all just got really out of hand. And luckily there was somebody that I found, a solicitor, that was able to deal with it all for me with the correct ID and everything. So if you have lived abroad and you're thinking about starting the process, I would just double check into obtaining a criminal record check from where you lived and just see what the process is on that and ways that you can be helped in achieving that.
So it's me next. They will actually look into receiving a reference from your ex-partner.
Do you remember when Nan almost dropped her glass of wine when you told her that?
Yes, I was very shocked.
And just now I'm gulping. I understand why they do this. I know that they want to build a picture of you, and they will contact people who've been in your life for a significant period of time. And obviously ex-partners can form part of that and form part of your journey and your past. And in our case, what they wanted to do for me was to make contact with my ex-partner. And I knew there was going to be nothing negative that that person would say about my ability to adopt a child. In its essence, that's what the question is. Now, if you're thinking that they're going to, i.e. the social worker again, is going to sit across from that person and give them a grilling, that wasn't my personal experience. All that was just a quick check-in with that person to see if they had any concerns about you wanting to adopt a child, to bring a child or children into your life.
Can I just ask you a question on that, Paul? In your case, it was, an experience that wasn't too bad at all. But there could be some very bitter breakups, couldn't there? So if this happens in every adoption process, it could be that ex-partner doesn't want to say anything good about you.
It's just double checking that there was no significant impact of that relationship that could lead to a negative outcome with a child. So, yeah, and the partner does have the right not to respond. It's just, it's one of those tricky ones where it's really hard for Paul to talk about, because obviously I was in the room and he's having to go over why they broke up and things. And luckily I already knew it all, but
yes.
So there is.
That's quite a difficult one in the whole process, isn't it? I should think probably, Paul, for you, that was probably the most difficult one. Because it's not an easy thing to do, is it?
No, and I think our relationship, Sam and I's, is built and has always been built on trust and honesty. And so, like we said, we were honest from the beginning. So there was nothing mentioned through that process with our social worker that Sam didn't already know, but it doesn't stop it from feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
So we are on to our guest spotlight segment. So we're going to pass you the microphone, which you already have, and it's in your house.
I've got a spotlight though, do you?
Sorry, the budget was slim. So we're going to pass you the microphone and give you your spotlight segment to talk about something that is special to you.
Okay. Oh, there's lots and lots of things that are special to me, but being a little bit on a detached level, I suppose the work that I do in the community is special to me, because I'm an integral part of an organisation called Didcot Events, and we put on different events for the community and to raise money for different local charities. And that, I think, is something that is lovely for us to do. It's good fun, and it helps the local charities that don't get the huge funding that national charities get. And I had the great joy of meeting, she's not so little, she's about 11, but she has got cancer, and she loves baking. And all she wanted was a mixer. And because I've had dealings with certain companies since the Bake Off, I was able to approach a well-known company that makes marvellous mixers. And I told them the story about her. They sent me in a beautiful box the latest colour, latest model KitchenAid with the accessories for her with their love, which I thought was a tremendous thing for a national company to do. They did not want any publicity at all over it. They were just happy to do it. And when I was able, I did it sort of a bit like when you're on the Bake Off and you have the cloth covering the ingredients. I had a cloth covering the mixer. I invited the girl around with her family, and I said, I've been able to get something for you. You'll have to come into the kitchen. And I took the cloth away, and her face, my Gramps took a video of it, which I play now and then because the look on her face was something so special. And when you get the chance in life to do something so wonderful for somebody else, it's like giving presents. I love giving presents more than I like receiving them. I like seeing the joy that people have from what I've carefully thought about, say at Christmas or birthdays. And she frequently texts me with things that she's made and still adores her mixer. So that sort of thing I'd like to carry on. And that is what is really special to me, apart from the family and the love I have for all of them. Does that answer your question?
And us.
And of course, that goes without saying.
Thank you very much for telling
That's
everybody
okay.
about that. It means a lot to us.
I love that
Yeah.
spotlight.
Oh,
Thanks.
well, that is it.
Yeah.
We
reached the end of the episode.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure that we've overrun again, but it's totally fine. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for this. It's a real passion project, what we're doing here, and we just want to help people as much as we can. And having a personal experience like yourself.
Well, thank you. I think what you're doing is wonderful. Can I just say, to give an insight to people who are just starting that process is huge.
Another announcement is coming up, and that is the Andy guest from episode 1 and from Dada and Daddy on Instagram. He is going to be joining us as a regular guest host. So a little bit like Loose Women, where they just pops on every now and again. And he will be back next episode to discuss stage 2 and to discuss panel, which is really, really exciting. Can't wait to delve into that. But until next time, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in a fortnight.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye. My Two Dads is produced by Sam and Paul. The show is edited by me, Sam, and you can find links to all social media accounts mentioned within the podcast in our show notes. Thank you very much for listening.